Next up, we've got Robin Goldsmith. And Robin, I met Robin about 6 or 7 years ago at another conference. And something that's interesting about Robin, besides being an author and a specialist in requirements, he's also a lawyer. And so, Robin, why don't you introduce yourself and take it away? And I'm wondering how you got from law to software.
I didn't. I was in software first.
Okay.
So can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yep.
So there are actually more lawyers floating around in the software world than you might realize. So Kim Kainer is best known as being an attorney, and Linda Hayes is also an attorney, although she keeps that secret. So, and I've bumped into a few other people along the way, but I was in software first, and I don't really practice, so that's probably makes the world safer.
Okay, well, why don't you tell us all about useful UAT versus non-useful UAT?
Okay, so Moss, you're the mechanical person here, is that right?
Yep.
Okay, now that's going to make this a little tricky because I've got quite a few animations.
I'll go slowly.
Well, I'm
Just raise your finger like this when you want to move, when you want to click.
Okay. Can you see me? Can you see my finger?
Yep.
Okay. Which finger is it?
What is that, right or left?
Okay. Welcome. So we're going to talk about user acceptance testing, and user acceptance testing is not the same as user story acceptance testing. So we're talking about real acceptance testing, the acceptance testing that's been around for a long time, and I liken it to self-defense because it's really the user or the business's obligation and opportunity to confirm that the system works properly from their perspective. And what user acceptance testing is really demonstrating is that the system will work when it's used in a real manner. And a real manner includes not just by the individuals, but also by the expectations, the experiences, the mindsets, and so forth. The things that developers historically have not been good at understanding, and that theoretically testers do, but all things considered, testers usually don't either. So can't we just trust the developers to do their jobs right? That's a 20-hour talk right there. So in my experience, user acceptance testing gets very little attention in the literature, and most of what's written about user acceptance testing, frankly, is not worth reading. So the fact that you don't see it is actually a blessing. So a lot of people just assume that user acceptance testing is a rubber stamping, a proof of concept, confirming the system requirements have been met. Okay. A lot of books say things like it should only be positive, valid proof of concept tests to demonstrate normal functionality, which means it's not showing the unhappy paths. A lot of people simply repeat tests that were done in the system test, except they have the users do them. And I think you can see that that's not very valuable. And that I've seen supposedly knowledgeable people say things like, UAT simply needs one test for each functional requirement or use case scenario. Well, I hope we all realize that you need at least 2 and usually 200 tests to give you real confidence. You need a valid and an invalid and probably more than one. Okay, so in spite of all this, there are many organizations that put extensive reliance on user acceptance testing to catch the problems that have been missed. And of course, user acceptance testing doesn't catch them. Now, by the way, Agile pretty much has hidden the word or the term user acceptance testing, and the closest that Agile has is a demo. And any of you who have ever been to a demo know that it's doing what the demonstrator wants it to do, if they're lucky, but otherwise, it's pretty much putting the fox in the chicken coop, okay? A demo is not exercising the system the way that a user would exercise it. Demos are invariably done by developers. By the way, thinking back to demos, we often think of them as being done by salespeople. I over the years, have attended two conferences where Bill Gates gave keynotes and Windows crapped out on him. So if Bill Gates can't get his demo to work, you know, I think that's instructive as well. At any rate, we won't dwell on that. Now, another thing is that most of the user acceptance testing that's done is reactive. Okay, that means it's done at the end, and it's usually much more than realized based on the system as written. Most of the user acceptance testing that I bump into tends to be unplanned, certainly unanticipating, and frankly, it's usually a lot of work, often with very little payback, doesn't find a lot of the errors. Okay, people get into a lot of finger pointing. Okay, and by the time that you get to the typical reactive user acceptance testing, it's too late to fix the errors anyhow. Now, there's a whole other raft of issues with traditional user acceptance testing. And a lot of it relates to the fact that the users, you know, are being asked to do stuff that they don't really know what to do. They don't know how to test. That's not their job. Okay, certainly the developers didn't know how to do it. And, you know, I've found that many, many times somebody hands the user the keys to the kingdom. Here's the software. Go play with it. Well, what's that mean? That does not build confidence in a user, just the opposite, because what do you play with? You play with toys. And these things are not toys, okay? Or just try it out. Well, what do I do to try it out? I don't know. And so you poke at a couple of buttons and nothing happens. And you don't know how it's supposed to work or whatever. You don't know how to use it, okay? And this, I think you can appreciate that this makes the users very uncomfortable and truly lacking in confidence. And they're kind of wondering why they're being asked to do this, because isn't this really the developer's job? Okay. And then when something goes wrong, they think they broke it. You know, well, some testers think that breaking is a pretty good thing. Users don't think that way. They think stuff is supposed to work, and they really don't like it. And they tend to get pushed to make it work the way the developer thinks that it ought to work, and they never really get into testing what they ought to be testing. Now, my proactive testing methodology includes proactive user acceptance testing. And I think we don't have time to go into it in great depth, but I think you would find that it makes the user much more confident and much more effective and much more willing to participate. Now, one of the key parts of proactive user acceptance testing is what I call proactive user acceptance criteria. Once again, this is not the same as user story acceptance criteria, and it's not simply reacting to the requirements. So we changed the whole basis of the mindset. Okay? And so what we're doing is asking the users, the business people, to identify what they have to have demonstrated to be confident that the delivered system works. We've got 5 categories of that, a systematic way of elaborating this. Very few people are familiar with this, but the standard of excellence, and this ties back to what was said in the first session, the standard of excellence here is that the users are, we say, look, you're really betting your jobs that this system will do what you need it to do. Otherwise, your jobs are in danger. And that's a whole lot different from just go push these buttons and don't do anything stupid. Okay? And you got to realize that the people using the system are going to make decisions about the acceptability of it, whether they do it consciously or explicitly or in a planned manner. And we say, let's make those decisions conscious, planned, and explicit. Okay? And what happens is that the users are truly empowered instead of being treated like idiots, which is the way the typical user acceptance testing goes. And the gist of it is, hey, user, you get to decide, is the developer's work acceptable? Okay? If it's not acceptable, it's not your problem, it's their problem. Okay? And that really is empowering. And when we do the proactive, ask them to help us define, or they define, we help them define. We guide them, we don't do it for them. We're simply saying, look, you're going to make decisions. Let's just get clear on how you're going to do it. That's going to make you a better decider. It's going to make the whole process flow a lot better. Okay? So this is a diagram of the courses in consulting that I do. One of the problems with spreading my 4x3 slides to 16:9 is that sometimes stuff doesn't move right. Okay, so these are some of the courses in consulting that I do, and they're laid out in relation to the various phases of the development process, which, by the way, exist in Agile as well as not. Whether you realize it or not, you have that same sequence of events. Okay. And so I do have one, a course on proactive user acceptance testing, as well as on testing other types of testing, and also requirements and project management, okay, and so forth, okay? And this is a pack of lies about me, and I think that's the game.
Oh, thanks, Robin. Does anybody have, I see some comments in the chat on, on your talk, Robin. Does anybody have any questions for Robin?
I actually had plenty. I mean, he definitely stoked a bunch of ideas in my mind. But I mean, one of the things you mentioned, Robin, is the fact that you can't just ask a user to try it out and not give them a whole lot of, without giving them a whole lot of like guidelines or whatever. But one of the major, the way I viewed user acceptance testing was to let them go in with as little knowledge as possible and see how far they can get through the product. You know, like how helpful our software designs are, where like how an iPhone, right? How Steve Jobs made the iPhone, where basically you went in, nobody knew what an iPhone was, but you still were able to go through different phases and figure things out because it was so, the UI was so friendly that everybody can understand, right? So that was.
Let me just interrupt you for a second. I've had this iPhone for about, I don't know, 6-7 years, and I find it very difficult to use. I can barely do anything. As a matter of fact, I tried to respond to a text today, and it keeps giving me these strange things. Do you want bubbles or balloons?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about the most recent softwares at all, right? This is, I understand they made it complicated, but when it first came out,
But
right,
I
the
mean,
US.
the point is that it ain't that easy. Okay? So yeah, it's sort of easy if you think the way that Apple thinks, but if you don't,
Exactly, right?
not that easy.
Exactly. So that exact point is what I thought was the whole premise of user acceptance, because there's this video floating around where, you know, there's this developer who's got this box with different shapes, and there's a QA person who's throwing different shaped things into the boxes, and she's, you know, the idea with which that was developed was not the way it was used. And I think that similar analogy can be used for user acceptance testing as well, where you as a QA person you've tested the system with, you know, certain preconceived biases because you're in the system all the time and you just think this is easy to understand and you move on. And when it comes to you, the end user, things become a little difficult, and then you realize, oh, it's because I've just been in this space all the time, and so something that's super obvious to me doesn't mean it's obvious to the end user who's like getting at it the first time. And that's why you'd let them go in with as little information as possible, so you see where they're struggling, and then you figure out how to make that better, right?
See now, what you're describing is not user acceptance testing. You're describing one small aspect of usability testing. And that aspect is basically intuitiveness. But there's all kinds of other stuff that's involved with usability besides intuitiveness that doesn't get tested. And none of that is what user acceptance testing is really intended to do. User acceptance testing is intended to demonstrate that the system will work when it's used in a real environment by real users with real experience and assumptions and mindsets. Okay, and the intuitiveness is
Yeah, Rob and I have a related question to what you just said.
Yeah.
This is Ying, and
Hi, Ying.
I work for the state, and we acquire a lot of systems from contractors. One of them spoke at the beginning of this event today. UAT would be the contractual basis for any organization that acquires software to ascertain if a system is fit for use and therefore can be accepted and for payment. Since you're at JD, I'm just kind of wondering, what is the perspective of your talk? Are you talking about internally developing organization? Because I don't see why the point is really contentious about the need for UAT were it a developed system delivered by a contractor, because obviously the user community, the customer or the acquiring organization would need to conduct a test to see if it's good enough to authorize payment. So you seem to be concerned that they're not real user acceptance testing that occur when, say, Agile is used. And I kind of feel that there's some assumption about your talk and the perspective of internal development, perhaps, because I don't see how there would be any question about the user needing to evaluate the system for acceptance if this is a contractually arrangement for a contractor to develop a system to deliver to the customer.
Have you heard of healthcare.gov?
Maybe a little bit more than you would believe.
Just
Yes.
going to say you're going to go healthcare. I'm going to springboard on what you were just saying there, Robin. Go ahead.
Yeah, Ying, you are right in some ways. You are right that in general, although this is not at all necessarily the only type of testing, but in general, the turnover from vendor to buyer is the occasion for determining acceptability of the vendor's product. The fact that it's the occasion for that says absolutely nothing about how that will be ascertained, or how well it will be ascertained, or by whom, or in what manner. Okay? And the fact is that and I've been involved in many software acquisitions. The fact is that most of the software acquisitions that I see have very little in the way of meaningful acceptance testing. Now, they also have very little in the way of meaningful testing. Okay. When you follow my methodology, testing is built into it throughout, so that the contract between the developer and the acquirer, the vendor and the acquirer, contract governs what happens or doesn't happen. And when I establish those, we build testing by the developers into their obligation. And then we get opportunities then periodically to see and review their developmental testing results, not just waiting until the end. Now, if you're working internally as opposed to externally, you've got the same situation, the same opportunities, except that acceptance is often much less explicit. Okay? And in my experience, regardless, the acceptance testing that is done is very seldom done in a manner that creates the conditions to demonstrate that you really ought to be doing. And that's what proactive user acceptance testing is about. In Agile, Agile's whole focus is on user stories and sprints. Okay? User acceptance testing is dealing with much bigger pieces of functionality. Okay? And it's no secret that Agile does a pretty good job for little pieces and a pretty bad job trying to put those pieces together. Okay? Yeah. Part of it is that it tends not to have true user acceptance testing, and even if it did, the user acceptance testing that they had would run a really good chance of not being appropriate. And,
Robin, if this was a live conference, I would probably walk up on stage and pat you on the back and say, thanks very much, Robin. It's tough to moderate a virtual conference, but we gotta keep moving here. We have one really important question for you. And the question is, where can we get your existing book on the real business requirements, and where can we get your upcoming book? Rachel's asking about this.
Okay, well, my existing book, if you go to Amazon, it's listed on Amazon. Barnes and Nobles and so forth. Or you could contact our tech house. Now, I will caution you right off the bat that my publishers were jerks and did not understand the market and priced it not too much for value, but too much in comparison to other books with the word requirements in the title. So I'll caution you about that. Now, there's another point that if you belong to IIBA and IEEE and so forth, they have contracted with an online book group. I forget the name of it. And so you can actually find my book and read it online.
So would you be willing to raffle off some free books for some of our people that attended today?
No.
Okay. I
Hey,
just thought I'd ask.
My
it doesn't-
publisher not only screwed me by overcharging, but charged me practically the same thing. So I
Okay.
don't have extra copies of that book lying around.
All right. Well, at least I tried.
The forthcoming book, you can't get it yet because it isn't finished.
Okay. At least I tried, and I'll talk about that a little bit later about comfort zone and getting out of your comfort zone and asking silly questions that people might make fun of. But
You still haven't explained how we're twins.
I forgot to explain that. Our next speaker has asked questions, as well as we'll be doing